Hey everybody, welcome to the Briefing Room. I'm Devin Dwyer on this very busy Wednesday in Washington. It's great to have you with us today. A lot of news happening at the White House and on Capitol Hill. We're also going to check in on a brand new ABC News podcast, a terrific story about a manhunt 50 years in the making. We'll bring you that coming up. But first, President Trump today pushing back against a mountain of criticism on his Syria policy from Republicans, from the Pentagon, from the military rank and file, and from foreign allies. Today defending his abrupt withdrawal in a statement from the Roosevelt Room, saying he has not endangered American security.
Turkey, Syria, and all forms of the Kurds have been fighting for centuries. We have done them a great service, and we've done a great job for all of them. And now we're getting out. Long time. We were supposed to be there for 30 days. That was almost 10 years ago. So we're there for 30 days, and now we're leaving. It was supposed to be a very quick hit, and let's get out. And it was a quick hit, except they stayed for almost 10 years. Let someone else fight over this long, blood-stained sand.
The president there defending his withdrawal of U.S. forces. There's someone else now that's defending that sand is Turkey and Russia. They control that shaded area up there on this map. They have taken control of that area. The president today announcing that he is also lifting sanctions on Turkey that had been imposed after the invasion. This, even as his U.S. Defense Secretary, Mark Esper, today said Turkey could have committed war crimes in that area. The U.S. has evidence that could have taken place. Our White House correspondent, Kira Phillips, is here to help us unpack all this. Kira, big picture here. The president is trying to turn the page not only on a rough week of headlines, but also on a key campaign promise that he's been spending months trying to do, and that is bring U.S. troops out of this region.
Which is what, critics are saying this is all about. Because if you think about it, it is, let's not forget this crisis all started when he abruptly pulled U.S. troops out of northern Syria.
Just a week ago.
Just a week ago, which basically green-lighted this Turkish invasion. So then he comes forward today saying he's going to make this big announcement, and he says we've brokered a ceasefire agreement lifting all sanctions against Turkey. He says that this is a permanent deal. However, then he followed up by saying, well, define permanent. That's kind of hard to do it in the region, but hey, it's a permanent deal. And then he said, let's let someone else fight this long blood-stained sand. Very powerful statement. I'm committed to pursuing a different course. However, U.S. will reverse the right to impose sanctions if human rights are violated. Now, this pullout was faced with severe criticism, both Democrats and Republicans, almost unanimously, saying that this was going to be a threat to the region, a threat even that could be brought here to the United States when we're talking about extremism, when we're talking about ISIS.
He made a number of claims about ISIS today. He said that those ISIS captives, thousands of them that had been put at risk by this invasion, in his words, have been rounded up. They're detained. Everything is just A-OK. But there are reports that a number of these ISIS detainees are still on the loose, and you hear from the top to the bottom at the Pentagon that this could put at risk the fight against ISIS. That's why that area is so important.
Here's what
Americans.
I would say to the president. Have you been to that area lately? Look, I was embedded during the war. I spent time in the region, and I'll tell you right now, I was looking back at his exact tweet here, and it said that the Kurds are safe and have worked very nicely with us. Captured ISIS prisoners secured. That is just simply not true. And if you ask the commanding officers and the generals and the admirals that were there, they're criticizing him as well now, specifically General David Petraeus, with whom I was with in Iraq, and he's saying that is just not true.
The caliphate rolled back, but as you say, that area, the concern is that it could be a launch pad for other attacks in the future. The big question seems to be here, Kira, and you know his supporters. You've been out there on the campaign trail as well. A lot of them very happy with the president's policy, his posture towards bringing the troops home, but it's how this was executed. You alluded earlier to the abruptness of that still needs to be shaken out with the American public, right? I mean, that's sort of the big question here was this ham-handed in how it was rolled out?
Absolutely, and that's the criticism that he's receiving right now, that this is a complete deflection from all the depositions up on the Hill talking about his actions in Ukraine, along with his personal attorney, Rudy Giuliani, and the pressure he was putting on President Zelensky of Ukraine to help dig up dirt on his rivals. So he's definitely trying to spin the narrative today.
I want to get into some some of that on the impeachment front. But first, before we move on, I do want to assure our viewers some of the criticism from Republicans even after President Trump's announcement today, an announcement that was meant to push back on the criticism. It seems he may have only made it worse. Here's a tweet from Mitt Romney, who says it is unthinkable that Turkey would not suffer consequences for malevolent behavior, which was contrary to the interests of the United States and our friends. Liz Cheney, top Republican GOP conference chairwoman on the House side, also the daughter of the former vice president, says America's withdrawal from northern Syria enables the resurgence of ISIS. ISIS is a threat to the American homeland. She says retreating and putting our security in the hands of Assad, Putin, and Erdogan strengthens our enemies, weakens America, makes us less safe. That is a stinging rebuke of President Trump. And then there was this from Lindsey Graham, an ally of President Trump, who says, I don't trust Turkey, Russia, or Assad to have the capability or desire to protect America from radical Islamic threats like ISIS, which have taken hold in that region. And Kira, you just spoke with Lindsey Graham as well. How's he feeling about what the president said?
Well, just want to reiterate, he said this once and he said it again, and the exact quote is that this has been the biggest mistake of the Trump presidency. If we abandon the Kurds, it will be to our shame and our national security detriment, and Trump will own the reemergence of ISIS. Interesting, too, if I can note, Ilham Ahmed, the president of the Syrian Democratic Council political wing of the Syrian Kurds, in town on the Hill here in D.C., testifying on the Hill. Listen to this, what she had to say. We have always been promised by the United States that you will not be subjected to that we would not be subjected to ethnic cleansing. We only want them to keep their promises, as in the U.S. they made a lot of promises. They're not feeling really good about this.
No, we'll have to see how this shakes out. This is a ceasefire also, which we will have to see if it holds as Turkey and Russia begin patrolling that area. Meanwhile,
Russia is the key word.
Russia is the key word, and so much of this administration has tangents and ties back to Russia, which is fascinating. Hanging over all this, of course, is the impeachment inquiry, which is continuing apace today up on Capitol Hill as investigators now are deposing a top Pentagon official involved with Ukraine policy. This is Laura Cooper, who went in to be deposed earlier today. She holds potentially significant information as to why the president withheld that military aid back in July to Ukraine. This follows damning testimony yesterday from the top U.S. diplomat in Ukraine who says that President Trump directly linked military aid to that country's investigation of Democrats, essentially a quid pro quo. Terry Moran is our chief national correspondent. He's been following all this as well. Terry, this testimony from these two top officials, career officials, has been gripping to members of both parties on Capitol Hill, and it's really hard to answer.
It is a turning point, I think, in this entire impeachment inquiry. With these officials' testimonies, especially Bill Taylor's, who was the acting ambassador in Ukraine, you see this scandal essentially metastasizing. What seemed at first to be something kind of located in the White House, a phone call between the President of the United States and the President of Ukraine that might have betokened, President Trump getting help with his political opponent from a foreign leader, now looks like a months long, as Bill Taylor said, second channel, private channel of foreign policy. Now, the problem for the president is there are too many witnesses in something that is this extensive and this involved. And those people, people like the acting ambassador, like defense officials who were responsible for the budget when the military aid to Ukraine was held up. There are just too many witnesses. Those people are now being called, and it does seem like they have a lot to contribute to the understanding of just what happened here.
And Terry, as the public sort of starts to digest all of this, these witnesses who are not familiar names, but now starting to see some familiar patterns in the stories that they're telling on Capitol Hill, public opinion is slowly swinging towards the Democrats. Let's take a look at a couple of new polls out today. This one from Quinnipiac University, support for the inquiry, just the investigation, is up just from last week, according to Quinnipiac. Now more than half of Americans. But take a look at this new poll, and I want to get your take, Terry, because you know the Midwest pretty well. We have a poll. This is from Wisconsin voters, a state key to President Trump's victory in 2016 and likely key to any potential win in 2020. Look at this. Much lower levels of support there just to conduct this inquiry. So there is a blanket level of skepticism out there, Terry, that I think speaks to the perilous path that Democrats are walking here when it comes to public opinion.
You know, Devin, it also speaks to the change in Wisconsin, which was a reliably Democratic state for years. I spent a lot of time there. I was there a couple of weeks ago, went to college there. I'm back there every summer. I was talking to friends just a couple of weeks ago there, and I said, so what do you think? And they said, Trump's going to win this state again. It's a red state now, was their feeling. 60+% of the voters in Wisconsin are white, working class voters, and that is really Trump's base in some ways. Nevertheless, you saw in the shift from the poll in April something that I think all these polls are telling us. The American public is leaning in to this inquiry. I get the feeling that people have a sense of how serious, of how really important it is to figure out what happened and whether it is something that warrants impeachment. I don't think the Democrats are there, and they shouldn't. But remember, we're only in sort of the first stage. There will be public hearings where they come out from behind those closed doors in Congress, and people can eyeball these witnesses for themselves and determine whether or not what they have to say amounts to an impeachable offense. And I think that this is a long, hard road for President Trump, because no matter what he does, right now, it seems like a very crucial majority of the American people say, keep going. We want to hear more.
And we heard the same thing, Terry, last week in Ohio around the Democratic debate here on ABC News Live. As you know, went on a road trip, talked to voters. That's a red state. Heard the same thing. People very interested in hearing the facts, for large part withholding judgment until they see more facts. And on that point, Terry, I want to get your last thought on a number of Senate Republicans that we've seen some reports of the past 24 hours of many of them withholding judgment on whether or not they would rule out impeachment. Many of them actually keeping it on the table. Republicans on the table with respect to President Trump, because they too want to know what is coming down the line.
They want to know what's coming down the line, and it does speak to the solemnity, to the seriousness of the impeachment process. They are constitutional officers. They took an oath, and what I get from that survey, that most Republicans are not saying yay or nay. They are not leaping to the defense of the president saying he will never be convicted by the Senate. They're saying, you know, we want to hear more too. That's Republican senators taking their responsibilities under the Constitution very, very seriously. Once again, that doesn't mean that the Democrats are going to be able to impeach and remove this president, but it does say that pretty much everyone who looks at this story so far, except for the hardest core of the president's supporters, are saying there's something serious here we want to know more about. It may not amount to much, but we can't just walk away from this one.
Such important context. Terry Moran, thanks as always for coming on ABC News Live. Terry Moran, our chief national correspondent back here in Washington, though. Diplomats weren't the only ones that Congress was grilling today. They also had Facebook CEO Mark Zuckerberg in the hot seat for the first time since 2018. Zuckerberg there taking some tough questions about the company's plans to launch a new cryptocurrency called Libra, among a range of other issues, including election meddling, free speech, child porn, all of it coming up today on Capitol Hill. And our deputy political director, Mary Alice Parks, is here. She's been reporting on the hearing. Mary Alice, Facebook doesn't seem to have very many friends on Capitol Hill these days on either side of the aisle, and they are target number one, maybe aside from President Trump, on the campaign trail.
Maybe it's not surprising with a company as big as Facebook, but clearly members of Congress want Facebook to step up on a number of fronts and basically be more of a moral leader in a lot of aspects of business and society. Facebook and Mark Zuckerberg there in the hot seat largely responded by trying to thread this tight needle and say, look, we are doing more as much as we can, but frankly, we're a private company and it's not always our job. I was struck by this quote from Mark Zuckerberg right at the top of the hearing. He was talking about election interference, foreign meddling, some of that fake news and social media propaganda that we've seen from foreign governments. And he said, we have developed more sophisticated work and technology than any company at this point, and frankly, a lot more sophisticated than governments. In some ways, he's saying, you do more, members of Congress. We're not the only ones that should have to take this on.
And yet resistant to some coming and proposed regulation by members of Congress. We've heard here in the briefing room yesterday, Beto O'Rourke, former Texas congressman, saying the company should be regulated like a publisher for the content. Elizabeth Warren saying the company should be broken up.
And absolutely. And you could feel in the hearing room how many members of Congress were really surprised and still wrapping their head around this idea that Facebook was saying saying publicly there in front of them that they would not engage in fact-checking of political ads. He was asked repeatedly to clarify that. He said over and over, it's not something that his company is going to engage with ahead of 2020. They're not going to fact-check political ads. We've seen Elizabeth Warren try to make this point herself. She ran basically a bogus statement in an ad to see if Facebook would publish it. They did. They said they don't want to be in the business of censoring politicians. There's a lot of people that can identify with that, but it's a very slippery slope. We saw Rashida Tlaib.
Tricky in light of their policy to ban misinformation on their platform.
Exactly. Congresswoman Rashida Tlaib from Michigan, obviously one of the Muslim members of Congress, said that she thought politicians now were getting an easier road than many of Facebook's average users. There's very strict policy against hate speech on Facebook, and she said that politicians should be held to the same standard. She said that truthfulness and decency were tougher and more enforced on the average Americans than average politicians.
Real quickly before we let you go, the purpose of the hearing, at least originally, was to talk about this cryptocurrency. I didn't hear, listened to a little bit of it today. I didn't hear any support for this new financial
one of those
tool.
rare moments where Democrats and Republicans together were really unified. There's a lot of skepticism about this cryptocurrency, how it would work, if it could be incredibly disruptive to global markets, and why many traditional financial services companies have backed away from partnering with Facebook in this. You saw a number of members of Congress, again, on both sides of the aisle, really trying to see what regulations they might be able to put in place to stop this from happening. It's
a fascinating story, as always. Facebook, a huge player, going to be a big force in the 2020 campaign. Mary Alice Parks, thank you so much.
Thanks, Devin.
Next now to a 50-year cold case that involving a one-time death row inmate who escaped police custody and has never been found. There he is. The U.S. Marshal Service has now made the case one of their top 15 most wanted and given ABC News unprecedented access inside the manhunt for Lester Eubanks. The operation is now the subject of a new ABC News podcast, Have You Seen This Man?, hosted by The View's Sunny Hostin. Here's a little taste.
He had a full plan. The guy had a plan.
I was just astounded that this could actually happen.
There were many years when it seemed like no one was even looking for Lester. But recently, his whereabouts have become the focus of the U.S. Marshal Service, the federal agents who track fugitives. The case is testing the Marshals.
Those 9 lives are running out, and we're going to catch up with Lester.
And is being urged on by those hurt most by Lester's crime.
He's had enough free time. He confessed to the crime, and his time is up.
And Sunny Hostin joins me now in New York, along with Deputy U.S. Marshal David Seiler. Guys, thanks so much for coming in the briefing room. This is an incredible story all the way around. Tell us about Lester Eubanks, what his crime was, and how he slipped death to be on the loose.
Well, he committed a series of horrific crimes. If you look at it, he raped and murdered a 14-year-old girl, a little girl named Mary Ellen, and there's no question that he committed the crimes because he confessed to them. He was convicted. He was sentenced to death row. However, his sentence was commuted to a life sentence. And then Lucky Lester, I like to think of him in some ways, he was allowed to participate in a program, a rehabilitation program, where he was really allowed to go shopping for Christmas. And he was allowed to go Christmas shopping unescorted, Devin, with a group of inmates. The other inmates came back from Christmas shopping. Lester did not, and that was 45 years ago.
Wow, that really says a lot about Ohio's policy there and treatment of those inmates. What an indictment that is. Deputy Marshal Seiler, you're one of the agency's most decorated agents. You've been on this case now for a while. Where does the manhunt stand? How confident are you you'll find him?
Well, Devin, that's an incredible compliment. And the men and women I work with on a daily basis, they really do step outside and do the best job that we possibly can. You know, we're looking for that one puzzle, that one piece of the puzzle that's going to get us closer to his front door. We know that someone's living with him. We know he's living in plain sight. And someone has that, they know that he has a scar on his right arm. They know he is a painter. They know that he is one of these men that can just fit into anywhere. And they know who they're living with. And that piece of the puzzle is going to come soon.
And we really hope through this podcast, Devin, that people will listen. They will be as outraged, I think, as we both are, and they will call in and they will help us. The interesting thing about this is when U.S. Marshal Seiler says that he was living in plain sight, we know in the 1990s he lived in South Central L.A. in plain sight. He worked at a hospital as a janitor. He may have been painting, along sidewalks. He also had a lot of friends, had a lot of acquaintances. He rode the bus to work. I mean, this is someone that became part of the fabric of our country, someone that is a rapist and a murderer, a child rapist. And so with the listeners' help, we really, really think that he may be brought to justice.
And Deputy Marshal Seiler, you also, we can't hear it in the piece, although it was some visuals of it online. You've used some pretty novel technology to try to piece together what this man, Lester Eubanks, looks like now, 45 years later. Tell us about that.
The greatest part of utilizing our partners and our partnerships with the Marshal Service and ABC is to be able to reach out to the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children. They took that photo and what we had, his jail photo from 1973 to when he just was released, if you will, for lack of a better term, walking away, he was released. They took that photo, utilizing his family members and those pictures that he had as a child. They were able to come up with a new photo for us, and we think that's the one photo that's going to help us.
Yeah, the age progression that was done is really, really significant. It's startling. I mean, it looks like Lester 45 years later.
It's incredible.
We're sure someone knows him, has seen him, and that's why it's called Have You Seen This Man? Because we know someone has seen him.
We've taken that age progression photo and given it to someone who has seen Lester within the past 10 years, and they said that's your man. And we're hoping to be able to utilize that information just to catch up to him.
That's right.
And it's an amazing image. It's on abcnews.com right now, and you see part of it there in the graphic for the podcast, but it's something worth taking a close look at. Finally, Sonny, I'm still struck by the fact that this even happened and that this man was able to walk away. And I know that your team has talked to members and survivors of the victim in that Ohio community. I mean, what are they feeling right now, 45 years later?
Well, I have to give, kudos to the ABC Investigative Unit. This story has been shepherded by Matt Mosk. He's done an incredible job, and he has spoken to many witnesses, the victim's family, and they want justice. That's what they want. They feel that Lester has been out for 45 years, a length of time, 4 times basically the age of their loved one, Mary Ellen. And bottom line is they want Lester Eubanks to be where he belongs, which is behind bars, so that he doesn't hurt anyone else, and so that also he pays the price for these heinous crimes. And it's a community that's hurting.
And a community that needs some help from our viewers and from our listeners, and everybody can do their part by downloading Have You Seen This Man for free. It's wherever you can get your favorite podcast starting today, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, wherever you listen to them, you can go there and download it. A couple episodes out now. It's part of a 6-part series. Our thanks to Sonny Hostin with The View and Deputy Marshal David Seiler. Thank you both very much, and wish you best of luck in finding this killer.
Thanks, Devin.
Thanks.
Finally today, we get a rare look inside the U.S. Secret Service and their forensics lab here in Washington today. The agency gave reporters a closer look at how agents who are not protecting the president are actually tracking down counterfeiters and other financial scammers. And our producer, Bobby Galen, was there. Bobby, real quickly, tell us about what you saw.
So one of the most surprising things that I saw that the Secret Service employs is that they can track, they do this thing, the technique called ink tracking. And it's where they take suspicious letters or suspicious packages, and they take the ink, whether that was written with a ballpoint pen, they can track the year from that ink when it was made, and they can track printer ink as well, so they can detect that device and source that.
To the source. Let's take a little look at what you saw today.
So within the laboratory, we are looking at fingerprint examinations, DNA collection, question documents such as handwriting or driver's license or credit card authentication. We also have our digital forensics team represented. So they're looking at cell phones or hard drives or ATM or gas pump skimming devices that would steal your credit card information. And so we're ever changing our capabilities and want to make sure our investigators know what we can do to help them solve their cases.
They have the world's largest ink library at the Secret Service. Fun fact, and actually behind her, you could see all the bottles of ink that they have to try to do exactly what you were talking about, trace these things back.
Yeah, exactly. As you said, this is the biggest ink library in the world, and they kind of showed me around the rest of the lab. And another one of the biggest problems that the Secret Service showcased today was that it was ATM and gas pump skimming.
Big issue right now.
Big issue, and that is where criminals use these kind of plastic coverings on the credit card reader, and they can take your information. Another thing that the public can look for are these pinhole cameras in these systems that can watch you actually put in your PIN number. So the biggest deterrent for that, the Secret Service is recommending to the public, is to pay with cash.
Pay with cash. All right, there's some advice, but really interesting. We always think of the Secret Service as protecting the president, which is a large part of their duty, but of course, they lead the charge on fighting financial scams and also counterfeiters. The lead agency on that, Bobby Gillen, thanks for giving us that close look. Thank you for joining us here today on ABC News Live. For the Briefing Room, we're here every day, 3:30 p.m. Eastern Time. Download the ABC News app. Follow us in your pocket all day long, commercial-free, and the live button at the bottom of the app. I'm Devin Dwyer in Washington. Hope to see you right back here tomorrow.